Guys, I'm halfway home on the Class A championships. That is, out of 48 decks, 24 of them have been eliminated. So I'm coming here exactly at the end of one of the partial rounds, which is nice because I actually get to give you an update at a point where all the decks are at the same point in progression. Well, except that some of the decks have made it directly to round 3 and some of them have to play 2B. So what goes on with that is, in this tournament, other than round 1, where I was a little bit generous with allowing decks to stay in at 0-2 because I didn't want 2 decks to be eliminated after only playing 2 games total, when a deck loses, they're out. When a deck wins, they're through to the next A round. I just noticed I called this round 3B for some reason. It's round 3A. And when a deck draws, I give them another chance to win or lose. Now, if a deck draws twice in a row, I just move them on to the next round. But the standings are determined first by win percentage and second by seed. So if a deck draws twice, since losses knock a deck out, that deck is moving towards the bottom of the standings, and they're going to get a really nasty opponent in the next round as a result. So draws still bad, just nowhere near as bad as losses. So let's take a look at some of the things that happened in this round. First, for the point of view of the tier list, I actually got to put one faction, Avengers, straight from A- to A in this tier. And the cutoff for A, wrong tab, cutoff for A is 2 decks with this faction must make it to round 3. The Avengers, because they made it through with Explorers and Knights, did not even need round 2B to make it there. Every other faction that is likely to make it there needs round 2B to make it through, because they've got, if we take a look at what's available here, besides the Avengers, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Wait a minute. I'm counting 14 individual factions. Oh, yeah, 14 ones plus 2 for Avengers should be 8 decks. Yep. So 14 factions that have 1 deck that has made it through to round 3 by winning in 2A, and 1 faction that has 2 decks that have made it. So let's take a look at the factions, and rather the decks that have actually made it through to round 3. Exploring Avengers played against Shield Kree, which I thought was a very scary looking matchup, and I believe I streamed this one. Exploring Avengers won 2 close games. Both of the decks were hitting big plays. Exploring Avengers just hit more big plays, and these are both fairly aggressive decks that don't have a lot of stalling potential, so when Shield Kree fell a little bit behind from hitting a dud hand at some point, they didn't have a way to come back, and Exploring Avengers was able to take both games. Another thing I want to mention before I forget, as we go on, first player advantage in this tournament is probably going to get even more important, because there's a lot of momentum-based rush decks in Class A. A lot of the best decks in Class A might be more aggressive than control-ish now, and in round 2A of 8 matches that ended in draws, all 8 of them were player 1 wins both games. None of them were player 2 wins both games. And it's usual for most draws to be player 1 wins both games, but all 8 is a little bit remarkable for having all of them be player 1 wins. That's a good indication that half a turn advantage is a very big deal. And actually, we've got a lot of close scores as well, so you can sort of see half a turn being enough. Second matchup, we had Hydra Wizards went down to Grim Frozen Tales. This is the opposite of what I predicted. I predicted a Hydra Wizards win, and what happened to Hydra Wizards is they just did not have extra actions when they needed them. They didn't draw their extra actions at the right time, and as a result, I had a few turns in a row where they could not get their Titan back out because they couldn't play enough cards in a single turn. They had good cards, they just didn't have extra actions. Grim Frozen Tales puttered along at a constant fast, but not blazing fast, pace while being... They didn't need their resistance to removal in this game because they were facing Hydra Wizards. They didn't dud. That's one of the things about Frozen. Frozen generally does not dud. It just maybe tends not to get fantastic hands, just consistently very good ones. And they just puttered around and won both games. Ninja Zombies is through. They are now sitting in second position overall in round 3 because they're the second highest seeded undefeated deck. They have not been challenged yet. What do I mean by that? I mean in round 1, they played against Ape Pirates. Ninjas counter Apes, Ninjas counter Pirates, Zombies also kind of counter Pirates. This is not really a serious test. Round 2, they then went up against Masters of Evil Werewolves. Masters of Evil do not like ninjas because Masters of Evil tend to kill their own minions. Part of what they do is they set themselves back on their supply of minions in play. They don't have extra minion plays to make up for their own minions that they kill, and so the removal pressure from ninjas hurts worse than it would most other factions. Werewolves both have a Titan that requires them to have power at 2 bases at the same time, and they have a really good 3. Like, their 3 with the help of the Titan is often better than their 4, and because of that, they really don't like the ninja removal either. On top of that, there's also the fact that werewolves often win their close games by doing broken things with Moontouched. Ninjas are capable of removing whatever you put Moontouched on, even if you give it invincibility somehow. If you give it invincibility with a base action, ninjas can remove that. They've got 2 copies of their card that removes that. If you put Unstoppable on a minion to make that minion indestructible by playing an on-minion action, you get poisoned. And often on a big minion, they would want to use poison anyway because poison plus Tiger Assassin is a great way to remove a minion of power up to 7. And so there's just no safe place to stick your Moontouched where you can guarantee getting more than 1 turn out of value out of it. And that cuts down on the top end of what werewolves can do when it comes to being able to sustain a long game where they're facing a lot of removal. Well, the removal is going to win out against werewolves a lot of the time. And so, in that sense, Ninja Zombies have faced 4 factions so far, none of which want to play against ninjas, and one of which doesn't want to play against zombies either. So they have not been tested. We will see in round 3 if they actually get a test against, whatever the second lowest deck is in the standings. After we finish round 2B, that will be who faces Ninja Zombies. Inca Dragons. They were the better deck. Inca Dragons is definitely one of the better Inca decks. It's a deck with a very consistent performance level. Not so much because they always draw the right power cards, but because they have a lot of good, but not crushing broken individual cards that together produce a very powerful deck. But what that means is they've got a lot of different good cards that can work together with each other. They're not too specific on needing exactly this pair of 2 cards to go together. They don't necessarily care exactly which 2 cards they put together. They just care that they draw a certain number of their good cards, and because of that, even though they'll have a different combination of good cards in every hand, usually the total capacity for what the hand can do is going to be pretty consistent. Their total capacity to lay out Imperials and accelerate them that way, lay out Hatchlings and slow the opponent down, it's going to be pretty consistent. And Shapeshifters generally does not like playing into Dragons. Lion Shifter King did get some early Mufasas, and it did not help. Inca Dragons is just the better deck. Teddy Wizards ran Mad Scientist Pirates over with a truck. Mad Scientist Pirates did a pretty good job. Okay. Let's take a look. What happened to them in round 1? Alright, they drew with the MOE Grannies. MOE Grannies are a pretty good deck. They drew with Orc Warriors. Orc Warriors are an outdated deck. And then they got stomped by Teddy Wizards. Yeah, okay. So MS Pirates maybe does not look that great relative to the field, but Teddy Wizards just, it hit on all cylinders. There was no stopping them. These scores, the 4 and 6 point differences, that looks closer than the games were because the Teddy Wizards had the luxury of like breaking and losing a base to end the game and just make sure that nothing can go wrong. Big Hero Grannies, yeah, 15-4, you can see what happened to the zombie critters. I believe this happened to them on stream. They got absolutely slammed in the first game. They made the second game look close on the scoreboard, but it was never really in doubt. Big Hero Grannies is fast, nasty, pretty consistent. Avenging Knights. I did not necessarily expect the Avenging Knights to beat the Exploring Critters both games, but they pulled this off. Exploring Critters did not really draw great. Every Critters deck is subject to sometimes just drawing all the Pokemon in the hand instead of the trainers in the hand. And then you end up with a really awkward... Like, every time you draw a Pokemon that you wanted to play out of your deck, you just lost a card draw. Even if you managed to get it back in your deck, that's a useful card you didn't draw. And that makes Critters very high variance. And in this matchup, they kept drawing all the wrong cards. And Explorers are pretty sensitive to having lots of cards available to play with, because they've got all those extra plays that they can do when a new base comes into play. And so when they're just getting all the wrong stuff, and then some of the Pokemon actually get stuck in play because they played them for card draw or something like that, it just, when Critters can go wrong, they can go very badly wrong. And this happened to them against Avenging Knights. Avenging Knights also played, I would say they played a similar game to Grim Frozen Tales. Both of the decks that won from the right side had a similar game where they just solidly did what they needed to do every turn. Avenging Knights, I think, grailed in the second game. I think they did not grail in game 1, but they grailed in game 2, and they're pretty consistent at grailing, because Iron Man really helps you grail. It just means that as long as you drop your grail somewhere with one minion already present that's at least power 4, and as Avenging Knights, all your minions are at least that big, then you can just drop Iron Man anywhere else with another one of your minions, and Iron Man's talent means you don't need to worry about the other minion having a movement ability. You get 3 minions of power 4 or more on top of that grail right away, and grailing negates losing 1/3/1 or 4/2 base and makes that a wash. The second game, I think they might have ended the game by just systematically, like they had grailed already and there wasn't too much in play. I think they were able to drop Excalibur or something on a minion and just boot it on top of both of their other +1 VP actions, the Green Knight and the other one that requires 8 cards in hand to go off, that whose name I'm forgetting immediately because I'm not playing enough Geeks. Yeah, they just fired both of those off and ended the game without a base break. And one of the things that happened in this, when Zombie Critters and Exploring Critters both went down, that means Critters are A-. And I think it's a deserved rating after the way Critters performed in those two matches. They lost 4 games in a row, and they lost 4 games in a row because they demonstrated their ability to occasionally draw garbage hands that you just can't do stuff with. When they're great, they're great. When they're bad, they're bad. And Critters do not only have one faction... Critters only have one deck that has made it through to round 2B, which means they cannot get 2 decks to 3A. Itty Grims. Grim Itty Critters is the only remaining Critters deck. And then down here, Beauty and the Werebeast beat up the Zombie Explorers, which Explorers of all factions. I'm kind of surprised by this one. Explorers are now A-. They cannot make A because the only remaining Explorers deck is Exploring Avengers, the 1 seed up here in 3A. There's no Explorer decks that are still in the tournament other than that. And Beauty and the Werebeast is... Zombie Explorers played a good match. Beauty and the Werebeast, however, is one of the strongest, hardest hitting decks in this tournament. They are Beauty and the Beast's probably second best deck after Mages that you can play with in this tier at least. I have not tried them with Ghosts, but I can assure you I don't have to play Beauty and the Werebeast plus Ghosts to know that it is a very, very strong deck. Until I play with Ghosts, I'm not going to know how Beauty and Werebeast, Beauty and the Mage and the Beast, or I called Zombies Beauty and the Undead Beast. I think maybe for Ghost, Beauty and the Phantasmal Killer. No, that implies having a mage. Beauty and the Ghost is probably just what I'd call it. Maybe Banshee and the Beast. Banshee and the Beast could kind of be cool, because Banshees are considered, they're not technically a ghost, but it's basically the elf equivalent of a ghost. So maybe they're Banshee and the Beast. But that deck, I don't know how it stands up to those other two top versions, but it's got to be in there as like those three are probably the top three synergy pairings for Beauty and the Beast. It's possible that like Beauty and the Geek might be better, but it wouldn't be better because Beauty and the Beast has huge synergy with Geeks. It's just because, Geeks are broken. So, yeah. Maybe Alien Beauty and the Beast might also be pretty overpowered because you get those extra 3-power minion plays and you can spend them on invaders, and you get all the draws from Beauty and the Beast, and so you get to do more stuff with invaders, and so you're breaking bases, and on top of that, the aliens are adding some defense as well. So, Alien Beauty and the Beast is probably also a strong, one of the better Aliens decks you can play, but I'm busy with Class A, so I'm not testing the Class S combos for them yet. Alright. And so that was the decks that made it through the 3A. As we can see, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6... Okay, wait, there were 16 here, so 14 decks that started 2-0. There are only 5 of those 14 have managed to start 4-0. And now let's talk about the pairings that are coming up in round 2B. Zombie Dragons made a draw with Ignoble Elves. They are going to face MOE Grannies. These are a couple of decks that I probably have a soft spot for both decks in here. I'd kind of like to see them both go through. We'll see what happens. Zombie Dragons. The cool thing about Zombie Dragons is that dragons are a problem for a lot of rush factions in general. But one of the answers that we had available to dragons from the time they came out was to throw ninjas at them, because ninjas match up very well, being able to infiltrate away the ruins, at least 2 of them, being able to Tiger Assassin and Seeing Stars away the Imperial Dragons, and when you take out their card draw, and you take out their ruins, at least the 2 original copies and not the flank attack, you tend to cut down. Also, Ninja Master pairs up very well against Great Worm. At that point, you tend to get rid of a lot of the problems that make dragons get out of hand against Swarm decks, and you can kind of just play your Swarm faction's game. Zombie Dragons is the partner that stops ninjas from beating dragons, because the zombies just bring back the Imperial Dragons, and you can't keep the Imperial Dragons dead. And when you allow dragons to draw lots and lots of cards, they draw more ruins than you have copies of something else. I need to pause. Junk call. Okay, I think now it does say that I am recording again. Yeah, okay, good. That's like the first time I've used the pause button on a recording, so looks like it worked correctly. Alright, Sinister Avengers on Dragon Pirates. I think Sinister Avengers is a better deck here. Dragon Pirates is just sort of a couple of strong factions that work well together. Sinister Avengers is actually a coherent deck, and Avengers, I think, are good into dragons. Sinister might also be good into dragons, because, like, this is a deck... Sinister Avengers is a deck that can go to base breaks without using their minion play too heavily. And that means that when you see a hatchling or an Imperial, you don't have to let it do things. Mage and the Beast. Why are Mage and the Beast playing round 2B? Well, because Steampunk Incas can beat any deck on a good hand, and that's exactly what happened. Steampunk Incas edged out Mage and the Beast in the second game, gave Mage and the Beast their first loss, but Mage and the Beast is now 11-1 overall. Mage and the Beast is playing Mad Were Scientists. Mage and the Beast should be a heavy favorite here. There is always the fact that Mage's removal primarily hits 3s. This tends to be good against werewolves. Then again, it's less important against Mad Scientists. But it's also just the fact that Mage and the Beast is one of the hardest hitting decks you can play in Class A at all. Vigilante Knights. Why did they end up in 2B? Because Princess Changers took a game off of them on stream. Vigilante Knights are probably a stronger deck than Frozen Avengers, but this one is close. Hydra Lions on Princess Changers. I don't necessarily have a favorite on this one. Honestly, Hydra Lions is pretty RNG. Hydra aren't giving you extra ways to search for Mufasa, so you're kinda dependent on how fast you can draw your Mufasa naturally. If you don't draw Mufasa for a while, you might find yourself looking a little bit stupid, like some sort of generic Hydra deck. If you do draw your Mufasa, get it running smoothly, you do need to be a little bit careful when playing Hydra Lions. This is a deck that managing it takes a bit of skill to do correctly. You really want to make sure that you are using your Lion Cub abilities correctly, and it is very easy to go wrong with it, and I'm not confident that I always do it correctly. But when you do get things to go correctly, you do get the Mufasa early, it is a strong deck at that point. Princess Changers is always, it's a straight up speed test. Heavily favors playing first because they getting that Titan out is a big deal. Hydra Sharks versus Steampunk Incas, roulette matchup. Hydra Sharks is a very good deck, but being good doesn't save you if Steampunk Incas has a good game. Now, the other thing about Ninja Knights, the matchup, there's another matchup thing for ninjas, and that is they played against MOE. Oh yeah, and MOE is the third faction that is now A- and definitely not making A. Not only did they lose both games to Ninja Zombies, Masters of Evil almost managed to cost Grannies getting an A rating, because MOE Grannies also got paired up against Ninjas, in this case the Ninja Knights. Grannies were able to carry the second game when they played first, but MOE has a very bad ninja matchup, and they almost cost a different faction their A rating by getting it. And honestly, Grannies might have had something to complain about if they got held to A- via the MOE ninja matchup. But Ninja Knights were on the plus side of this. Grannies are facing Zombie Dragons. Is a little bit of a rough matchup for them in the early game, but in the late game, MOE is going to be really nice to have against Dragons, because Dragon minus VP doesn't do anything to slow down Alt VP. That's one of the reasons why Aliens are a terrible Dragons matchup in general. But Ninja Knights themselves, they did not quite manage to knock Grannies out of the running for A, which would have been a weird result. They're playing the Itty Grims. Itty Grims might almost be the better deck here, but Ninja Knights is still really good. I don't know. Ape Nightmares. Ape Nightmares have actually drawn 2 matches now. I picked them as one of my top finishers. I think Dragon Pirates managed to snipe some key minions away from the Ape Nightmares. Like, they might have sniped out Sally or something with a powder keg. They did something crazy, very, very big like that in the second game in order to survive them. Ape Nightmares versus Ignoble Elves. So the important thing about this matchup is that Flower Child is not an action. However, the other important thing about this matchup is that Flower Child hits 3 or less, and unlike Apes, where the big stack is based on your Baboom, Ape Nightmares is not tied to Baboom in the same way that almost every other Ape deck that isn't Ape Pirates tends to get tied to Baboom. And for that reason, hitting a 3 with something that goes through shielding is not that big a deal, because Ape Nightmares might just want to build a stack on Sally or Jack or something like that. And Ignoble Elves, if Ignoble Elves ends up slow playing things, they are going to get zombie duck toy shoved down their throat on every single base. Because how is Ignoble Elves going to get rid of a big stack involving a zombie duck toy? They aren't. So this might be the matchup where Ignoble Elves exits the tournament. Yeah, that's all the 2B matches. And I probably will do another video going over what happens in round 2B and previewing round 3A. A lot of these, I'm starting to say a lot more, this looks really close, I don't know who's ahead, and some of this is because I think something like the 2nd through, or maybe 3rd through 20th best deck in this tournament are a lot closer to each other than something like the 25th versus the 48th best. Some of the decks towards the bottom, some of the decks that went out in round 1B were decks that were maybe lucky to be here. Now just about all the decks deserve to be here, and it's a question of, are they consistent decks that are consistently good? Are they decks that are occasionally batshit great? Or there's maybe a couple decks that are consistently great. But for that, what that means with that kind of situation is there are not going to be that many matches going on where you can call a clear winner. Like, I think Sinister Avengers is clearly favored. I think Mage and the Beast is definitely favored. Ape Nightmares is probably favored, but the other 5 matchups, hard to say. Like, and either deck could conceivably win both games in the other 5 matchups. So I think this is going to be an interesting round to see, and I think I've babbled long enough about it. Happy smashing, everyone.